This podcast assumes that you have a general knowledge of the Tate-LaBianca murders. Sharon Tate Polanski, Jay Sebring, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent were murdered on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles on August 9, 1969. Lena and Rosemary LaBianca were slain in their Los Feliz residence the following night. Charles Manson, Charles Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Quenwinkle, and Leslie Van Houten were convicted of those murders. Say hello to the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. Hi, I'm George Stimson, and this is installment number 9 of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. In the last episode, I examined the official prosecution motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders, helter skelter. That motive being that the murders were committed in order to start a race war that would eventually lead to Charles Manson becoming leader of, well, maybe the whole world. Of course, there's much more to the prosecution's motive than that, and if you're interested in more detail and need a refresher course in the state's point of view, please watch the previous episode of this podcast. Helter Skelter is arguably the most bizarre motive ever offered up in a murder case in United States history. But it wasn't so bizarre that the jury in the murder trial of Charles Manson and his co-defendants couldn't accept it as an explanation for Manson's supposed ordering of the Tate-LaBianca murders. That jury convicted all 4 defendants and sentenced them to death. And ever since that trial, Helter Skelter has been accepted in the media, and thus in the popular mind, as the reason behind the Tate-LaBianca murders. But this is despite the fact that, as I have shown, nobody actually connected to the case, from the defendants to the prosecuting district attorney himself, believed that the Helter Skelter philosophy held by Charles Manson was behind the slayings. When it comes to Charles Manson, this is very important, as I will show in a future segment of this podcast series. But in the meantime, we are left with a question that has become one of the mainstays in the continuing fascination with this case. Namely, if Helter Skelter was not the motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders, what was? Over the ensuing decades since the crimes were committed, many alternate motives and theories have been offered. Some of these can be dismissed out of hand, but there is still a core number of alternatives that are given some credence today. Those alternatives are revenge against Terry Melcher in the show business industry, something to do with drugs, Charles Manson's insatiable lust for death, and the copycat motive. Let's look at these alternative motives. Revenge against Terry Melcher. In 1969, Terry Melcher was a Hollywood producer who had been involved with some of the most successful entertainment enterprises of his time, including the movie Easy Rider and such superstar musical groups as the Byrds and Paul Revere and the Raiders. In 1968, Melcher met Charles Manson at the Sunset Boulevard home of Dennis Wilson, who was the drummer for the popular musical group The Beach Boys. At the time, Manson and several of his friends were frequenting Wilson's house after he invited them to after a chance encounter when Wilson picked up some of Manson's friends hitchhiking. Since Charles Manson was musically inclined, his association with Wilson naturally connected him with other members of the musical and entertainment scene in Hollywood. One of these people was Terry Melcher, but although friends of Melcher encouraged him to record Manson, he eventually decided that he was not interested in doing anything with Manson professionally. This decision has fostered the belief in some persons that Manson was homicidally disappointed at not getting some kind of show business gig. And beyond that, the Beach Boys also infamously used a variation of a Manson song on one of their albums and gave him no credit, much less any royalties, for it. This incident did generate some justifiable animosity towards the entertainment industry. These slights, the theft and alteration of Manson's musical composition without recompense, and the supposed rejection of Manson and his music are the basis for one of the more favored alternative motives for the Tate-LaBianca murders, namely revenge against Terry Melcher and the entertainment industry for not recognizing Charles Manson's genius. Here's the revenge against Melcher scenario in a nutshell from Bobby Beausoleil.
Charlie was told that he would be compensated for the use of the song. And the amount that he was told was $5,000. Now, he didn't care so much about the money. If you're in prison and you owe somebody and you give your word and you don't keep your word, then, that's a justification for being killed. So he sent texts to kill Terry. Not a house full of 5 people. See, that's what's so critical here. He wasn't picking a house full of innocent people. He was picking Terry Melcher, and the people that were there were the ones that took the brunt of what Tex Watson brought there that night.
And here is Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney Stephen Kay's version.
Now, the motive for the murders, make no doubt about it, was helter-skelter, but Manson had an ulterior motive. He was very mad at the prior residents of the Tate House. He had been there before. He knew the layout. He and Watson had both been to a party there. But he was very mad at Terry Melcher, Doris Day's son, and his girlfriend, Candace Bergen, because Manson wanted a recording contract for Melcher, and Melcher auditioned him and wouldn't give him the contract. So the reason that this particular residence was picked out was because Manson wanted to send a message to Melcher and Bergen that there but for the grace of God go you.
That Charles Manson had yearnings to be a show business success, or even, it makes me sick to say it, a rock and roll star, is one of the enduring fantasies of this case. Supposedly rejected by the music industry, Manson lashed out at the people who had wronged him, as represented by the show business people killed at 10,050 Cielo Drive, which also happened to be the former residence of Terry Melcher. But is this really believable? Manson had already had brushes with the entertainment industry after he followed up on contacts given to him by a fellow inmate at the Terminal Island Federal Prison, where he was held before his release in March of 1967. An early recording of Manson's music from this time shows that while he might have been serious about his music, he was not very serious about the process of making a record. Americans generally idolize celebrity, so it might seem plausible to people who fantasize about the rapture of fame that Manson would be like them and want nothing more than the attention and adoration that comes with being a success in show business. But in reality, although some of his friends might have harbored hopes that he could succeed in the music industry, Manson himself could see the business restraints involved in such a situation and concluded that they conflicted with his free spirit. So while there might have been some kind of resentment towards Melcher based on a perception that he didn't come through with a recording contract, and that resentment might even have focused the killers on his former residence, there is not much substance behind the contention that the murders were committed primarily as an act of revenge against him. And if the murders on Cielo Drive were meant to send a message to Terry Melcher about welshing on Charles Manson's record contract, that message got lost in the pipeline, because before the arrest, Melcher made no connection between Manson and the homicides at his former residence. Revenge against Terry Melcher was not the motive for the Tate murders, and it certainly could not have had anything to do with the murders of the LaBiancas the next night, as they had no connection with any kind of show business intrigue involving Charles Manson. Therefore, this motive does not fit the evidence of the crimes, and it is a poor choice as a serious alternative to helter-skelter. Something to do with drugs. The second alternative motive involves some variation on a drug deal gone sour. Several lengthy and detailed scenarios involving drugs have been put forth in books, but while I intend to look at these theories in more detail in a future episode of this podcast, for now we will look again at the official police investigation into a drug-related motive. As we have seen in episode 2 of this podcast, the police early on thought that the murders at the Polanski residence were narcotics related. In the police investigative reports, there are three sub-theories involving drugs. 1. A drug party freakout leads to murder. 2. A drug deal goes bad. 3. A drug dealer decides to rip off and murder his customers. The news media reported on the drug angle on the murders extensively, even naming the main suspects who were questioned about the murders, a trio of drug dealers. These three men were given complete immunity as to their own drug businesses, as long as those businesses had no bearing on the case. So the three, being innocent of the crimes, were candid, honest, and complete in their answers to questions. Not only were these suspects cleared of any involvement in the murders, but they also could not provide any leads to police that would point them in the direction of any other viable suspects. So it looks like a drug angle was almost immediately suspected by the police as being a motive for the crimes, at least on Cielo Drive, and the media reported on these suspicions at great length. And the fact that the victims were connected to the entertainment industry only further fueled the belief that drugs were involved in the murders, since it was no secret that Hollywood was awash in drugs. As Los Angeles Police Lieutenant Earl Deemer said to Billy Doyle, one of the three drug suspects, "If we tried to publish the names of everybody that used drugs in Hollywood, it would take up a telephone book." Now, I realize that there are other drug theories of the crimes besides this official one, but they would apparently involve persons who were completely unrelated to the three drug suspects who were questioned and completely unknown to any acquaintances of the victims. Possible? Yes. Probable? We'll be examining some of these alternate drug scenarios later. In the meantime, it's reasonable to conclude that as far as the known narcotics associates of some of the victims, there was no connection to the murders which occurred on Cielo Drive. Other theories considered by police were hired killers and a residential robbery gone bad. But neither of these hypotheses panned out, and since we know who the killers were, we can rule them out as well. Hired killers did seem a possibility, though, since there didn't appear to be any other crime committed at Cielo Drive other than the murders of the people who happened to be there. And in fact, that was the case. The only crime committed on the property, other than some petty theft, was the murders, because the main reason for committing the murders was that murders needed to be committed. But the killers weren't hired or directed to do their work by anyone else. Charles Manson's supposed obsession with violent death. The motive of Manson's insatiable lust for violent death and murder comes from Vincent Bugliosi in the same Penthouse interview where he admitted that he didn't really think that Helter Skelter was Manson's motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders. In that interview, Bugliosi explained, "The third motive, after Helter Skelter and the message to Melcher motives, was Manson's preoccupation with death. He was always lecturing the family about death and how beautiful it was. In fact, most of the songs he wrote contained constant references to death. And where did he lead the family after the murders? Death Valley. Paul Watkins, who left Manson before the murders, said it best. Death was Charlie's trip." This is easily dismantled. Lecturing about how beautiful death was? Ego death, maybe. Most of his songs contain constant references to death. Anybody who has heard any significant amount of Manson's music knows that that is not true. He led his friends to Death Valley after the murders? No, Kathy Gillies led them there before the murders. Of course, the image of Manson as a murderous monster has also been put forth by Charles Manson himself because, well, why not? If that's what the people wanted, that's what Manson gave them.
Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
A scary guy. But both of these quotes are from a promotional interview for Newell Emmons' book, Manson Not in His Own Words, and they are intended to be shocking and to attract attention to Emmons' book. And they did just that. Charles Manson was a genius at manipulating the media, and he knew exactly what to say and how to act in order to make it into the popular conversation. These two quotes are good examples of how he did this. No, the obsessed with death motive won't do as the driving force behind the Tate-LaBianca murders. That leaves us with only one other alternate motive that is ever given serious consideration, and that is the so-called copycat motive. The copycat motive offers an explanation for both the Tate and the LaBianca homicides. In this scenario, the killings on Cielo and Waverly Drives were done as copycat murders committed in the same manner as the murder of Gary Hinman, in an attempt to make authorities think that the killer of Hinman was still at large and that Bobby Beausoleil, who was in custody for the Hinman slaying, was therefore innocent and would be set free. Of all the alternative motive theories of the Tate-LaBianca murders, the copycat motive is the one with by far the most meat on it. What kind of meat? Well, copycat has been claimed as the motive by most of the killers involved in the slayings. Charles Watson, in Will You Die for Me, included it along with his other motives for the crime, which were to ignite helter-skelter and to get money for a move to the desert. Watson's inclusion of helter-skelter as a motive is no doubt due to his reading of Bugliosi's book several years before his own book was written, since he did not offer it as a motive at his murder trial. Getting money for the desert is not too credible, since even after killing several people, they had gotten no such money. The copycat inclusion, however, is credible. Since the murders were the only crime committed, that fits in with a crime plan, the sole purpose of which was to commit copycat murders which would free Bobby Beausoleil. Susan Atkins has always claimed that the motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders was to commit copycat crimes to free Beausoleil. At her murder trial, she testified that she participated in the murders because I believed it was right to get my brother out of jail, and I still believe it was right. We didn't know how to get Bobby out of jail, so someone mentioned that we should do something equal as to make it appear like someone else had done it and not Bobby, who wouldn't be present. In Child of Satan, Child of God, Atkins wrote, "Out of all the confusion and mass of words, the constant use of drugs, came a vague sort of scheme to try to convince the police that Bobby could not have done the Hinman killing. It was a plan for copycat murders that would make the police believe that they had the wrong man in jail, since similar revolutionary killings were still taking place while Bobby was behind bars. To the best of my understanding, the copycat plan was the primary motive behind the Tate-LaBianca murders." And at her 1993 parole hearing, she reinforced copycat as the motive during this exchange with a parole board member. "You understood that you were going to Gary Hinman's house to get money." "Yes." "Okay, and then when Beausoleil murdered the victim there, then it was decided to commit these other crimes to help him because he was at that time in jail." "Yes." "So that they would think, well, the crime patterns are continuing, so," "Right. It must have been done by somebody else." Patricia Krenwinkel also testified during the murder trial that the copycat plan was the motive for the murders. About August 4, 1969, Bobby Beausoleil got arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. Then one day, Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, and I were speaking about it, and Linda was present. We thought about how to free Bobby. We put a lot of thought into it, and one thought stayed in our minds. We thought of doing some killing like sidetracking the police to make them believe that someone else did it. Some people just think, but we did it right away. We all got in the car and did it. It's hard to explain. It was just a thought, and the thought came to be. Spahns Ranch resident Catherine Gypsy Scherer testified during the penalty phase of the murder trial that Linda Kasabian thought up the idea that the girls should commit murders similar to that of Gary Hinman in hopes that the police would believe that the real killer of Hinman was still at large and thereby setting Bobby Beausoleil free. Another ranch resident, Catherine Capistrano Gillies, testified, "You know, I'm willing to kill for a brother. We all are. To get a brother out of jail, I would kill. I would have killed that night, except I did not go. In a 1973 documentary, Manson friend Sandra Good explained,
And the girls loved Bobby enough to do this. They were willing to die as they took these people's lives. They were willing to give their lives, which they're doing right now. They're on death row.
In 1972, when he was still on California's death row at San Quentin Prison, Bobby Beausoleil recalled his relationship with Charles Manson and its consequences in an unpublished manuscript titled Burning is the End. I don't have to ask Manson anything. He already knows what to do. Charles Manson is one of my brothers, you know, and I'll follow my brother through all time, through all the hells and fire and back again, and I have, for no better reason than because I love him. He has shown me a number of times that he is willing to do anything for me, and many others have shown me by their words and by the things they have done that they will do the same for me. For anyone willing to look, that's easy enough to see. Let the actions of my lovely but deadly family testify to that truth. When the police put me in chains, put me in jail and threatened to kill me, 8 or 9 people were killed in an attempt to free me. That's a strong love. That's the allegiance we have with each other. In a later interview with We magazine in November of 1981, Beausoleil said, I do believe there was something to that, the get brother out of jail motive. Yes, I don't think that whoever's idea it was to commit these Tate-LaBianca murders would have been able to get the participation of those involved unless there had been this noble concept. Perhaps they interpreted the thing, him killing Hinman, that I had defended them from him. You've got to understand that these people were not totally without some kind of scruples. I think Hinman's death led to a situation in which Charlie and the others, who had made similar commitments to each other, were forced into a situation of acting on their commitments. Charles Manson has also put forth copycat as the motive for the murders, as when he testified at his trial, these children, everything they done for the love of their brother. So, is there anything to the copycat motive? A lot of people close to the case on the criminal side say that there was. But is there any evidence to back up this motive? Does it jibe with what we know about the murders? Let's take yet another look at the personalities, dynamics, and events of the summer of 1969 and see. It has to be said up front that the copycat motive was not well thought out. But this could be expected, coming as it was from persons who, while familiar enough with the police on the street level, had no idea of how homicide detectives approach their work and how thorough and tenacious they are when trying to solve murders. To persons with a lack of understanding of the dedication and experience in which the police investigate murders, it might have seemed that such a plan would work. We don't know how much knowledge Beausoleil's friends at Spahn Ranch had about the evidence police had against him. If they had been assured that the case was weak, they might have thought that the police would easily be distracted from Beausoleil by similar murders. But we don't know. We do know, however, about certain events in the summer of 1969. As I said in an earlier installment of this podcast, the Tate-LaBianca murders were not standalone crimes, but rather were the momentum-driven end result of a series of crimes that began with the shooting and presumed killing of Bernard Crowe by Charles Manson on July 1, 1969. As I showed pretty clearly in episode 3 of this podcast, Manson shot Crowe in self-defense as the culmination of a drug deal gone wrong initiated by Charles Watson. Watson ripped Crowe off. When Crowe called Spahn's ranch and threatened the place and the people there, Manson inadvertently got involved. During a meeting in Hollywood to straighten out the problem, an argument ensued which ended with Manson shooting Crowe as the larger man advanced on him. Manson thought Crowe was dead. Therefore, in the minds of the people at Spahn's ranch, Manson had killed Fort Charles Watson specifically and the people at the ranch generally. And therefore they, and Charles Watson very specifically, owed Charles Manson up to the point of killing for him and for each other. This belief that Manson had killed for his friends is a much more reasonable and believable explanation for why his friends would later kill for him than that he made them kill through manipulation and mind control. Because Manson's act showed the level of his love for them. There is nothing in the scenario I presented regarding the Crow shooting that is inherently unbelievable or contradicted by any evidence. To the contrary, it is totally believable and jives with all of the known evidence. The next in the series of crimes was the murder of Gary Hinman in Topanga Canyon on July 27, 1969. In episode 4 of this podcast, I accepted the scenario that the Hinman murder was the result of a mescaline deal between Hinman and Bobby Beausoleil, wherein Beausoleil eventually ended up stabbing Hinman to death after he threatened to go to the police over Charles Manson slashing the side of his face during an argument involving a gun. This version of events contradicts the motive given at the trials of Beausoleil, Charles Manson, and Bruce Davis, in which that motive was given as a strong-arm robbery gone fatal. But the only evidence supporting this motive was the testimonies of individuals who took the stand in exchange for having criminal charges against them dropped. The drug deal gone wrong theory, however, is backed up by the evidence of white powder found on a scale at Gary Hinman's residence, and the fact that one of his vehicles ended up with the Straight Satan's Motorcycle Club, to which Beausoleil owed $1,000 based on the mescaline deal. The drug deal gone wrong theory is the version of the crime given by both Bobby Beausoleil and Charles Manson. And, as we have seen, the drug deal theory has also been accepted as being true by the members of the Board of Prison Terms conducting Beausoleil's parole hearings. So it is not far-fetched to accept the premise that Beausoleil killed Hinman to keep both himself and Charles Manson from being arrested for the face slashing. Therefore, it would not be farther-fetched to accept that Manson felt appreciation for Beausoleil's act, that he was impressed that his brother would kill for him, and that he owed him. Once again, the level of devotion between Charles Manson and his friends had risen to the level of murder. And, as with my analysis of the Crow shooting, nothing in this version of events is unreasonable or contradicted by any evidence, and no aspect of the crime is unexplained. It is much more sensible than the simplistic get his money and kill him version of the crime offered up by prosecution witnesses during the murder trials. It is reasonable and believable. Bobby Beausoleil was arrested for the Hinman murder on August 6, 1969. By the evidence of the testimony of people who were present, the news of Beausoleil's arrest was then the chief topic of concern for his friends at Spahn's Movie Ranch, and especially so for Charles Manson. And there were people at the ranch who were indebted to Manson, led foremost by Charles Watson, who owed Manson to the point of murder for creating the situation wherein Manson had had to shoot Bernard Crowe to keep him from molesting the ranch and the people who lived there. Linda Kasabian owed Manson for his taking care of her husband and his irate friend when they showed up at the ranch demanding their money back after Linda had stolen it from him, at the urging of Charles Watson. Susan Atkins owed Manson after he took care of a problem she created when she stole hashish from violent prone members of a motorcycle club. Manson, obsessed with getting Bobby Beausoleil out of jail, told the people who owed him to pay him their debts by getting Beausoleil out. As he recalled in an interview with Diane Sawyer,
"Just explain to me, though, I'm not dumb, explain to me simply why that house that night, why they
Which
went
house?
there.
Which night?
The house on Cello Drive, the Tate house. Why did they go there that night?
Because Tex had been there before, and he went to a familiar place.
And why did they kill people that night? What did they think they
Because
were doing for you?
they
at the
freaked out,
war?
man. Tex was stoned. He was good, he got, everybody was loaded, man.
He said he wasn't. He said he was coming off an LSD trip. He had a little speed.
A little speed. Well, not around me, he didn't have no speed, because I wouldn't allow no speed on that ranch. I kick ass over there.
He
I
says
don't
he
allow that
had
stuff
some.
around me. I take a little grass, a little LSD, but none of that is destructive. You can ask any of them other girls that'll tell you the other side of this game. I don't play drugs. I play light, light dibby dabby chipping, but I don't really get down heavy with it.
What did they think they
Are
were
we ready here, man?
Yeah, we're ready,
Sneak up
we're
on me
ready.
again. We ready here? Okay, ready. War.
What did they
war.
think they were
We are at war now.
But what did they think they were doing for you?
They wasn't doing anything for me. It's
What did they think they were doing for you?
Okay. If you are me and I am you, everything you do is for you, is for me too.
So what did they think?
If you're in
they
one
were
mind, if
achieving
I
for
am you and you are me and we are all together, and then who's responsible for come together over me right now? Da, 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 da. It's all his fault. Oh, no, it's his fault. No, we put another false face on it. It's Halloween. It's your fault. So now, wait a minute. Criminal behavior's the same. It's mundane in most minds. Criminal will always go to a familiar place. Tex had been to that house. Tex went back to that house. Here's the conversation. Indian Mesa. We got 4 campfires. We got 4 queens on a motorcycle gang, a motorcycle group that rides SS motorcycles out of Venice, Santa Monica. So we're riding motorcycles and we're all up there and we got these fires going and we got this big problem that came up. I had to go shoot somebody for Tex. Bobby's in prison. My brother's in jail. Now, understand my mind, all my life I've been in jail because I didn't have no one to get me out of jail. I didn't have no brother outside. So I spent years and years and years and years just because nobody would come and sign their name and get me out of jail. And the jail couldn't let me out because I didn't have no place to go. So I spent 22 years in prison because I didn't have nobody outside. I can't let somebody that's with me stay in jail. It just ain't, it's not in my makeup, man. I got to get my brother out of jail.
So you needed money to do that.
Well, here's the division between your mind and my mind. Here's where the chamber opens up. When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. Well, you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, I ain't got enough money. I got a little money, and anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money and let you sue them in court, you dig? In other words, like, I don't have enough money to go to the lawyer to get Bobby out. So everybody's standing around, and I said, pay me. Pay me what you owe me, now. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, get my brother out of jail. He said, how do we do it? I said, I don't know how you do it. I don't care how you do it. Do it. Now. Do it. And they said, how do we do it? I said, don't ask me how to do it. I don't want to be no part of no conspiracy. But however you do it and get it done now. And they said, well, we don't know what to do. We'll get a lawyer. And then, here, Leslie and Patty, they said, if we get a lawyer, all they're going to do is lie and take our money anyway. Now, system, blame it on your lawyers. If your lawyers ain't lying and taking the money of the poor people, then the poor people got a court to stand on, and they got rights as individuals for a revolution they fought in 1776 that guarantees rights to a common, ordinary farmer, poor man on the street like me. A rebel. I got my rights in the 76 courtroom. If you don't give me my rights in the courtroom, then I become King George. And I got all the rights then. And when I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do, because I got that Confederate sword in the kitchen. Don't invoke me. Do it. Get it done. How do we do it? I don't know. I don't want to be involved in it. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. In Japan, they call it ninja. I don't get involved in violence. I'm not a violent human being.
Did you tell the women to do their witchy things?
I said, if you're going to do something, leave something witchy. Just like I would tell you, if you're going to do something, do it well. And leave something witchy. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there. Have a good day.
Just 2 days after Bobby Beausoleil was arrested, the Tate-LaBianca murders took place. Cause and effect? It looks like it. And why would the people from Spahn's Ranch commit those murders if not to commit copycat crimes that would make the police think the killer of Gary Hinman was still at large and thus free Bobby Beausoleil? What other credible reason could there be? As I said earlier, the motive for the murders was, for the most part, to commit murders. Finally, I want to suggest another factor involved with these crimes that can explain the underlying unclear thinking behind the copycat motive. It was in large part conceived by persons whose judgment had been adversely affected by several weeks of indulgence in methamphetamines, or speed. Both Charles Watson and Susan Atkins have frequently stated that they were using speed regularly in the weeks leading up to the murders, this against the well-known feelings of Charles Manson, who didn't want speed around the ranch. As Watson wrote in his book, Charlie, for all his use of acid, was absolutely against speed. I was willing to kill for Manson, but I wasn't willing to give up my speed. Atkins later recalled in her memoirs, Tex and I had been secretly snorting or inhaling methadone, crystal speed, for 3 or 4 days before the murders. In violation of the unspoken family code, we had kept our own private stash and were using it constantly. And then there's this.
What happened that night you all went to Sharon Tate's house? What really happened?
Well, I remember getting in the car with Tex and Tex Watson and my other 2 co-defendants, 3 co-defendants actually. And before I ever got in the car, Tex and I had our own special little stash of cocaine. I think it was cocaine or methadone, I'm not sure which. It was speed, and we both snorted some speed and got in the car. We were very, very wired.
So much for Charles Manson's alleged total control over the behavior of his, quote, followers. Watson also specifically recalls using speed on the days of the murders. He remembered that around dinner time on August 8th, the night of the murders on Cielo Drive, I didn't have a lot of pep or something, so I took some speed to get me moving. He says that later in the evening, after he supposedly received murder instructions from Charles Manson, I reeled over to the porch where Susan and I kept our Gerber's jar of speed hidden. I took a couple of deep snorts of speed and went off. On the next day, after the murders at the Polanski residence, Watson later recalled, I spent part of the day working on dune buggies and snorting speed. That night, before driving off to Waverly Drive, while people were getting things together, Susan Atkins and I took the opportunity to hit our speed bottle, and I gave myself 3 good snorts in each nostril. I knew now I'd need it for what was to come. Speed is well known for having a detrimental effect on a user's judgment. If you'd have no experience of this either by using speed yourself or knowing someone who has used it, you don't have to look far to find evidence of this. And if you have darkness in your soul to begin with, the problem is compounded even more. If you want to check out this aspect of the copycat theory, snort speed for several weeks straight, involve yourself in a homicidal incident with the resultant intensity and paranoia, and then tell me how clearly you're thinking. Yet another piece of circumstantial evidence pointing to the possibility of speed being a contributing factor to the 2 nights of murder is the ferocity of the attacks on the victims. At the first residence, one victim was stabbed 7 times, one 16 times, one 28 times, and one 51 times. At the second residence, the 2 victims were stabbed 12 and 41 times. The first victim was also stabbed through the neck with a knife and had the word war carved into his abdomen. The number of wounds in both instances indicates a lot of ruthless energy that clearly amounted to overkill, resulting from a speed-induced frenzy. The copycat motive was brought up by the defense during the penalty phase of the Tate-LaBianca murder trial. The 3 girl co-defendants testified to its veracity, as did several friends of the convicted murderers. In Helter Skelter, Bugliosi claims he demolished Copycat, but all he really did was point out some inconsistencies in the Tate-LaBianca and Hinman slayings and claim that they voided the copycat concept. But these inconsistencies are easily explained by different people doing different things at different locations, some of them under the influence of behavior-altering drugs, and some of them likely affected by the chaos and intensity of the murders themselves. Interestingly, Bugliosi admits that his rebuttal to the copycat motive was shallow, but he says it was because my objective was to completely demolish it, yet not dwell on it so long that it would seem that I was giving it credence. In other words, he was afraid that the jury might think that it was true. And he was right to worry about that, because there is nothing in the copycat motive theory that is demonstrably untrue. It is a reasonable and believable motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders. Remember Occam's razor. All things being equal, the simplest solution tends to be the best one. Copycat is the simplest and yet most complete of the alternative motives to Helter Skelter. It shows reasonably that the Tate-LaBianca murders were the end result of a logical series of homicidal incidents and were not standalone crimes. True, the Tate-LaBianca murders were committed for Charles Manson, but they were not carried out at his direction. They were committed for him because he had already shown his commitment to his friends by shooting and presumably killing Bernard Crowe. And in doing so, he took the chance of sacrificing his own life in perhaps the most noble and honorable expression of love ever. And in that sense, ultimately, the real motive for the Tate-LaBianca murders was love. There is nothing in the copycat motive that contradicts any of the evidence of the crimes. It fits the timeline. The only thing wrong with it is the flawed thinking that went into formulating it. But that can be explained by the amphetamine abuse of several of the killers and by their lack of understanding of how homicide detectives do their jobs. But from the prosecution's point of view, there is something very wrong with it. Namely, that it is not a personal motive for Charles Manson to have had the Tate-LaBianca murders committed. And that is supremely important, as I will explain in an upcoming episode of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast. This has been the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast, the podcast dedicated to the truth about the Tate-LaBianca murders, Charles Manson, and more. The views expressed on this program are solely those of the individual speakers, and they do not necessarily represent the thoughts, ideas, or opinions of any other persons, either living or dead. Visit our companion website at www.goodbyehelterskelter.com. There you can find more information about this podcast. Also, check out the Goodbye Helter Skelter Facebook page for information on upcoming programs. And let us know what you think by way of contact@goodbyehelterskelter.com. We will address any comments, questions, or concerns on future installments of the Goodbye Helter Skelter podcast.